what if the single most rebellious thing you could do today is simply to vanish? We live in an era where every flicker of thought is broadcast, every moment documented, and your entire worth often measured by your digital footprint. In such a world, the deliberate choice to step back isn't seen as strategy. It's often mistaken for defeat. Society celebrates the loud, the rapid, the perpetually visible. But visibility is not synonymous with vision, and constant presence is not the same as having purpose. We've been conditioned to fear that if we aren't always accessible, we'll be erased from the collective memory. But what if the true peril isn't being forgotten by others? What if the real danger is forgetting or never truly discovering who you are? As the Stoics taught, courage is the pathway to freedom, and in our current age, perhaps no act requires more courage than reclaiming your own consciousness from a world intent on colonizing it. To disappear, then, is not a loss of self. It is the active, urgent search for it. And within that cultivated silence, you don't fade away. You sharpen, you pare away everything that isn't authentically yours. You meet the person you are without the filter of performance, the need for applause, the static of external noise. If you are walking this quieter path toward inner clarity and self-mastery, consider subscribing. This is your act of honoring that solemn commitment you're making to yourself. This isn't passive entertainment, it's active transformation, one silent, deliberate step at a time. They tell you that being constantly present is a virtue, that showing up, staying connected, keeping in the loop, that's how you maintain relevance and prove you matter. But no one tells you the steep cost of this relentless availability, what it drains from you. You awaken already feeling behind, as if your life belongs to everyone else before it ever belongs to you. Your attention is hijacked. The instant your eyes open, messages, alerts, the silent, heavy weight of unspoken expectations. You don't even get to choose who you are each morning before others begin requesting the version of you they recall from yesterday. And so you slide back into the character, the role you've been rehearsing for years, the agreeable one, the productive one, the endlessly available one. But beneath the surface, a deep knowing stirs. Something is off. You can't remember the last time you felt like you genuinely belonged to yourself. This perpetual visibility might look like engagement from the outside, but internally, it's a slow, quiet erosion of the soul. You are performing for the comfort and convenience of others, while your authentic self waits patiently in the wings, wondering if its turn will ever come. There's a specific flavor of exhaustion that doesn't stem from doing too much, but from being too accessible. It's not merely physical tiredness, it's a spiritual fatigue. You scroll through feeds of people performing presence, and you mirror the act, not out of desire, but from a primal fear that if you don't, you'll cease to exist in their world. If you don't show up, people forget. If you don't comment, they move on. If you don't respond, you are labeled distant. So you comply. You show up everywhere, except in the center of your own life. You laugh when you don't feel joy. You reply when you have nothing true to say. You agree to things that feel misaligned, just to avoid the uncomfortable friction of being misunderstood. Slowly, the walls of this invisible performance tighten around you. What was advertised as connection becomes a cage. What was meant to facilitate communication morphs into a form of silent surveillance. But the moment you become conscious of this weight, truly feel its pressure, something pivotal begins to shift. You start to perceive the real cost of your constant availability. You recognize the addiction to validation cleverly disguised as a need for belonging. You begin to see how effortless it is to lose yourself entirely in the desperate act of being liked. And here is where discomfort transforms into awakening. Because once you notice the weight, You cannot unsee it. The tension between who you are and who you feel compelled to be becomes impossible to ignore, and it whispers to you, quietly at first, maybe it's time to stop showing up for everyone else and start returning to yourself. Maybe stillness isn't laziness. Maybe strategic unavailability isn't rudeness. Maybe disappearing just for a season isn't abandonment, but the sacred beginning of your reconstitution. It's tempting to believe this realization is selfish, but the stark truth is this: when you are stretched thin across 1,000 expectations, you lose the capacity to be anything of depth to anyone. And worse, you lose the ability to be anything meaningful to yourself. You begin to exist in a state of perpetual reaction, not creative action. Each interaction, each ping, each demand pulls you a little further from your core. And after a while, you forget what that center ever felt like. Your sense of self becomes blurred. Your mind moves faster than your values can anchor it. You answer questions you haven't had a quiet moment to reflect upon. You say yes because offering a no would require more explanation than you have the energy to give. In a culture that glorifies instant replies and immediate gratification, the most profound rebellion is to take your time. The greatest act of self-respect is to go quiet, not because you have nothing to say, but because you are finally truly listening to yourself. Seneca advised, "Associate with those who are likely to improve you." But how can you possibly discern who improves you if you are perpetually tangled in the noise? How can you know who you are evolving into if you are always plugged into the expectations and agendas of others? Solitude is not absence. It is the prerequisite for clarity. Disconnection is not rejection. It is an act of preservation. And the pervasive idea that you must be constantly seen in order to matter is one of modern life's most insidious lies. You matter most when you are in alignment, and alignment cannot be discovered in a world that endlessly demands fragments of your soul. It is found in the very silence you have been conditioned to fear. So the essential question shifts. It's no longer, am I showing up enough? The question becomes, is the version of me that keeps showing up even one that I respect? Are you living a life you've consciously chosen, or are you merely maintaining a persona that makes others comfortable? Because the external world rarely encourages your inward journey. There is no applause for setting boundaries, no rewards for claiming solitude, no medals awarded for cultivating inner peace. But those who find the courage to go there, to confront that accumulating weight, to sit with it in the quiet, and to finally gently lay it down, they are the ones who return with something genuine, and often they return quieter, firmer, less available on demand, but unmistakably more alive. Epictetus stated, "No man is free who is not master of himself." You cannot possibly master yourself if you are constantly being pulled in the directions others choose. So perhaps this isn't about severing all ties to the world. Maybe it's about the gradual, firm reclamation of your own sovereignty. It begins in small, almost invisible acts. Turning off notifications without guilt. Leaving messages unanswered until you are genuinely ready to engage. Choosing depth over speed. Opting for reflection over reaction. It isn't dramatic. It may not even be visible to others, but internally, it is revolutionary. You begin to create instead of merely consume. You begin to speak from cultivated insight instead of raw impulse. And slowly, like a familiar face emerging from a fog, you begin to recognize yourself again. Not the version everyone else is accustomed to, but the one you have ached to return to. The one who doesn't require an audience to feel certain. The one who understands that real power doesn't emanate from being everywhere at once, but from being fully, deeply rooted somewhere within. There exists a peculiar prison that comes with being known, not truly known, but remembered. People often don't see you for who you are in this present moment. They see you through the lens of who you used to be. And the problem is, you begin to perform for that outdated image. You smile at the same old jokes. You play the same comfortable roles. You slip back into familiar, worn-out dynamics simply because that's what's expected. You perform out of habit, even when you have profoundly changed on the inside. The world treats you like a frozen still from a movie it has already watched. And slowly, that antiquated reflection becomes a subtle weight, a constant reminder that no matter how much you evolve, you remain trapped inside someone else's narrative about you. That is the hidden cost of being perpetually perceived. It's not always overtly painful. Sometimes it even feels comforting, reliable, familiar, but it locks you into a frustrating loop. You strive to grow, yet the moment you enter a certain room, you are magnetically pulled back into old patterns. A particular friend somehow draws out the version of you that doubts everything. A sibling makes you feel like you're 10 years old again. A colleague's tone makes you second-guess your own seriousness. It's subtle, but its influence is everywhere. These dynamics freeze you in time. They don't allow breathing room for your transformation. And before long, you begin to question whether genuine change is even possible if no one around you is willing to acknowledge it. But here is the raw truth. People will not always recognize or welcome your growth, not because they are cruel, but because your change challenges their comfort. If you become someone new, they have to relearn you. That requires effort, adjustment, a shift in their own perceptions. So often unconsciously, they cling to the old version of you, the one that makes their world feel predictable and secure, even if it no longer fits who you are. And here is where the real danger emerges. You start shrinking to meet their memory. You laugh at things that no longer genuinely amuse you. You stay silent when you long to speak your truth. You avoid introducing new ideas because you fear the confused or dismissive reaction. In doing so, you betray your own evolution. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But becoming is not a performance. It doesn't happen on a public stage. It occurs quietly, sometimes painfully, and almost always away from the watching eyes of others. That's the hardest part, because as much as you crave inner growth, you also crave external recognition. You want someone to say, "I see you changing," but that validation rarely comes when you need it most. More often, the world resists your growth. It treats your change as a subtle threat. It might mock your new seriousness, dismiss your contemplative silence, or gently push you back into the mold you've worked so hard to break, all to restore its own sense of comfortable equilibrium. And if you aren't vigilant, you'll fall into the trap. You'll keep trying to be perceived in a certain way, hoping that others' perception will eventually align with your internal reality. But perception is projection. It belongs to the observer, not to you. You cannot control it. You cannot curate your way into authentic selfhood. The more you strive to be seen a certain way, the more you begin to fragment. You adjust your expression based on the room. You dilute your depth so it fits into a social media caption. You water yourself down just enough to remain palatable to the widest audience. But every time you do this, a vital piece of you disappears, not in the transformative sense of shedding, but in the tragic sense of loss. This is why the currency of perception is so costly. It doesn't merely distract you from your path. It can compel you to abandon it entirely. It trains you to perform for fleeting applause rather than to pursue enduring alignment. You become addicted to being understood, even if that understanding is based on an outdated or incomplete version of you. But if your identity depends on being recognized by others, then you are no longer free. You are beholden to a mirror that reflects a distortion. And the more you gaze into that mirror for confirmation, the more distorted your own self-image becomes. Seneca once wrote that it is the power of the mind to be unconquerable, but your mind cannot remain unconquered if it is perpetually bent toward pleasing an external audience. The most insidious part is that you'll start to gaslight yourself. You'll feel flashes of clarity, moments where you touch the person you're becoming, and then you'll dismiss them. You'll convince yourself you're being too dramatic, that maybe you haven't changed that much after all, that perhaps the world is right about who you are. This is how you lose yourself, not in one catastrophic moment, but in 1,000 tiny increments, in half-hearted agreements, in polite nods and empty smiles, in silences where your truth goes unspoken. These small surrenders slowly erode your internal compass, and one day you'll wake up and wonder where that emerging, sharper, more honest version of you went. It didn't vanish, it was buried beneath the immense weight of being seen too soon, by eyes unwilling or unable to look any deeper. But here is the pivotal shift. When you begin to value your inner life more than your outer image, you start to break free. You stop needing to be understood. You stop requiring approval. You stop performing the role that everyone else wrote for you. And in that quiet, firm defiance, something remarkable happens. You begin to live for yourself, not in a selfish, isolated way, but in a sovereign way. You reclaim the space to think your own thoughts, to feel your own feelings, to grow in directions no one anticipates. You become less predictable, less eager to please. But in that process, you become infinitely more real. That's when you realize that being perceived is not the ultimate goal. Becoming is. And becoming requires solitude. It requires a deliberate withdrawal from the mirrors that distort. It demands the patience to be unknown for a while, perhaps even to be misunderstood. Epictetus wrote, "If you wish to improve, be content to appear clueless or stupid in the eyes of others." That is the admission price. That is the toll for the path. To become your truest self, you may have to release your grip on being perceived accurately or being perceived at all. And yes, it can feel lonely. Yes, it is uncomfortable. But eventually, that very discomfort matures into a profound peace. You no longer seek clarity from the outside world. You generate it from within. And in that self-generated clarity, you find yourself again. Not the self that pleases, but the self that pulses. The self that aches to grow. The self that dares to detach from the old narrative and begin writing a new one. Quietly, unapologetically, completely. This is where authentic transformation ignites. Not when the world finally sees you differently, but when you no longer need it to. When you stop asking for permission to evolve. When you stop shrinking to fit into others' understanding. When you disappear from the gaze that holds you back and reappear only when you feel whole, because no one else gets to define the limits of your becoming. And no one else should carry the weight of your truth. A strange, unspoken narrative is woven into modern life. That silence signifies something is wrong. If you step away, people assume you're lost. If you stop broadcasting your life, they wonder what happened. If you don't reply instantly, you're labeled cold, unavailable, perhaps even selfish. And so, we stay plugged in. We remain visible, audible, constantly performing a semblance of stability, even when our inner world feels fragile. But what if the story we've been sold about silence is completely backwards? What if stepping away isn't a sign of weakness, but the first authentic act of strength? The fear of disappearing isn't truly about vanishing. It's about no longer receiving the validation we've grown dependent on. For so long, we've equated our worth with our visibility. If you're seen, you matter. If you're heard, you're relevant. If you're active, you're okay. This obsession with external proof has made us terrified of our own solitude. And yet, solitude is the very crucible where every genuine transformation is forged. There is a profound courage in choosing quiet that most will never comprehend, not because they are incapable, but because they are terrified of meeting themselves without an audience. Your greatest becoming happens in the spaces you fill with nothing but your own presence. When Carl Jung spoke of the descent into the unconscious, he wasn't advocating escapism or shirking responsibility. He meant the deliberate, chosen act of stepping away from the noise so you can finally confront what lies beneath it. It is a descent, yes, but not into chaos. It's a descent into clarity, a peeling away of all the masks you've worn so skillfully that you forgot the contours of your own true face. You don't descend because you are weak. You descend because you are done pretending to be strong for others while remaining a stranger to yourself. This path is not easy. In the silence, the world stops applauding. There are no likes, no instant replies, no validating feedback loops. There is only you and the contents of your own mind. And at first, this can be deeply unsettling. Without distractions, your fears surface. Without applause, your insecurities speak in clearer tones. Without constant interaction, you begin to hear the internal noise you used to bury beneath a frenzy of activity. But that is precisely where the beauty is born. Because when you stop running, what once chased you begins to lose its power. When you stop trying to prove your worth, you start to see what you genuinely value. Silence doesn't empty you, it refills you, slowly, quietly, powerfully. Consider how many people live entire lifetimes in a state of reaction, reacting to messages, to others' moods, to trends, to endless expectations. Reactivity becomes their de facto identity. But when you retreat, you are no longer merely reacting. You are observing. You are noticing patterns. You are questioning your own reflexes. And slowly, without any forced effort, you begin to choose differently. You realize how much of your life has been shaped by others' assumptions, and how little of it has sprung from your own conscious intention. In silence, you begin to reclaim authorship of your existence. The myth that silence equals failure is just that, a myth. It serves those who benefit from your perpetual distraction, from your endless participation in the noisy marketplace of attention. But real life is not measured in notifications. Real evolution doesn't unfold on a public stage. It happens in the quiet choices, the hard pauses, the nights you choose to sit with your discomfort instead of numbing it with stimulation. It's easy to speak over your pain. It is much harder to listen to it. And it is in that deep, patient listening that you start to untangle what is authentically yours from what was imposed upon you. Sometimes silence is the only way to remember who you were before the world told you who you should be. Sometimes disappearing for a season is the only way to return as someone whole. And that return, it is never rushed. It is earned. You don't emerge with fireworks and fanfare. You emerge with a quiet clarity, with boundaries that were born in stillness, with values that were refined in solitude, with a presence that doesn't feel the need to announce itself. It simply is, and it moves through the world differently. It speaks less but sees more. Seneca observed, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." And that wasting often occurs in the endless noise we mistakenly call connection. We fill our days with everything but ourselves, and then we wonder why we feel so distant from our own lives. Silence, then, isn't about doing nothing. It's about doing something sacred, rebuilding your inner world. One slow breath, one clear thought, one brave moment of not needing to be seen at a time. This is not cowardice. It is power, the kind of power that doesn't demand attention because it is already anchored within. The kind that doesn't chase external validation because it knows its own intrinsic gravity. And when you've sat with yourself long enough, when you've gone quiet, not because you were broken, but because you were ready, you start to feel the shift. You don't rise to prove anything to the world. You rise because you feel whole, because the noise outside no longer outshouts the clarity you've cultivated inside, because the time spent in the reflective dark has made you sharp, not soft, and because you finally know the difference between who you were trying to be and who you actually are. There arrives a moment of clear-eyed realization that being constantly reachable isn't a badge of honor, it's a leak. Your presence, your energy, your focus has been diluted across too many people, too many platforms, too many shallow expectations. And in that stark realization, something sharp and decisive cuts through the residual noise. You understand that you don't have to endlessly explain yourself. You don't have to soften your edges to make others more comfortable. You don't have to justify your need for space to breathe, to think, to simply be. Strategic disappearance begins with reclaiming this fundamental truth. Your boundaries are not up for committee review. Turning your phone off is not rude. It's a responsible act of self-preservation. Saying no is not selfish, it's a statement of honesty. Choosing solitude isn't strange or antisocial, it's a necessary condition for depth. There is a unique potency that grows only in silence. It isn't loud or performative. It doesn't announce its arrival with theatrics. It simply begins to solidify the moment you stop apologizing for not showing up to things that don't serve your growth. The less you explain your choices, the more others are forced to confront their own reactions. Your conscious silence becomes a mirror. People begin to notice your absence, not because you vanished in a dramatic blaze, but because you have ceased participating in the old, draining dynamics. You become, in the best sense, unpredictable. You are no longer bound by the tired patterns everyone expected from you. You reclaim your time and your attention as non-negotiable currencies, and in doing so, you fundamentally shift the relational dynamic. Carl Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming a fully integrated, authentic self, requires a temporary rupture with the outside world. He said that wholeness isn't achieved by cutting off a part of your being, but by integrating all its contrasting elements. Disappearing in this light isn't about amputating your life. It's about gathering all your scattered fragments and pulling them back toward your center. You disappear from the noise so you can return to a state of coherence. You stop performing to recover your authentic presence. And when you do this, your life slowly begins to reshape itself around your essence, rather than your obligations. This kind of intentional retreat isn't easy. It disrupts, it confuses people, it unsettles those who've grown accustomed to your constant availability. And sometimes it even frightens you, because when you say no, when you go quiet, when you withdraw your attention, you have to face the primal fear of being forgotten, of becoming irrelevant. But here is the liberating counter-truth. Being forgotten by people who only valued you when you were useful or convenient is not a loss. It is a profound liberation. The right people, the people who truly see you, don't need constant access to feel connected to you. They respect your rhythm. They don't take your necessary distance personally because they understand it is an essential part of your growth. As you begin to disappear with purpose, you stop merely reacting to life and start consciously designing it. You make choices instead of being pulled in a dozen directions. You curate who has access to your time, your thoughts, your energy, not from a place of arrogance, but from a place of alignment. You stop over-explaining your schedule. You stop seeking validation for your silence. And in that newly created space, something powerful takes root. Your life begins to speak for you. Your thoughtful absence creates curiosity. Your quiet demeanor conveys substance. You're no longer trying to prove your worth through constant output. You've already affirmed it by choosing to exist on your own sovereign terms. Disappearance, when undertaken as a strategy and not an escape, is not a retreat from reality. It is an elevation above the chaotic fray. You begin to see things with piercing clarity. You notice patterns you were too distracted to recognize before. You witness the magnetic pull of old habits, and for the first time, you consciously choose not to answer their call. You become deliberate. Every yes is conscious. Every interaction is intentional. You don't disappear to disconnect from life. You disappear to reconnect with it more truthfully. You tune out the static so you can finally hear your own unique signal again. This process won't be met with applause. There are no badges for going quiet. No one will congratulate you for walking away from the collective chaos. But in the fertile silence, something infinitely more valuable emerges. Peace. Not the fragile, temporary peace that shatters under the slightest pressure, but the durable, unshakable peace that is built from deep internal agreement. When your outer life finally begins to reflect your inner values, the constant internal push and pull fades, that gnawing tension dissipates, and the stillness you might have once feared becomes the very foundation of your newfound strength. Epictetus said that freedom is the only worthy goal in life, and it is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. Strategic disappearance is the embodiment of this principle. It is a quiet, firm refusal to participate in what no longer fits, a calm detachment from the compulsive need to explain, to perform, to be liked. You stop being a supporting character in someone else's story and step firmly into the role of author of your own. And the more you live from this place of sovereignty, the more magnetic your presence becomes. Not because you're trying to impress anyone, but because people can intuitively feel when someone is living with integrity. You don't need to be highly visible to be powerful. You don't need to be loud to be remembered. In fact, the most unforgettable people are often those who vanish for a necessary season and return sharper, quieter, clearer. They speak less, but their words carry more weight. They show up with a presence that doesn't chase attention. It naturally commands respect because it has been forged in the fires of solitary work that can only be done alone. They disappeared not to escape life, but to meet it fully, without distortion. So when you feel that inner urge to step away, to turn down the volume, to claim your space, listen to it. Don't fight it. Don't over-explain it. Trust that the world will continue to spin in your absence. It will. And when you choose to return, you won't need to make a grand announcement about who you've become. They will feel it. In your calm, in your clarity, in the way you no longer offer pieces of yourself, where you aren't genuinely valued. Disappearance, when done with right intention, doesn't render you invisible. It makes you undeniable. The world often prefers you reactive because reactive people are predictable. They consume more, scroll more, doubt more, buy more. But a still mind, a focused, deliberate mind, is powerful in the best possible way. It notices, it questions, it creates. Reclaiming your attention isn't merely an act of self-care, it is an act of quiet resistance. It is the rebellion of consciously choosing what enters your mind, what earns your focus, what deserves your finite energy. And the first crucial step is to stop treating your consciousness like a public hallway anyone can wander through. Start locking the doors. Start deciding who and what gets a key. Start choosing deliberate silence over meaningless stimulus. You were not designed to live like this. Your mind is not a dumping ground for the latest trends and anxieties. Your emotions are not meant to be mere reactions to every alarming headline. Your thoughts are not just recycled opinions from voices louder than your own. But to rediscover what is authentically yours, you must go quiet, not forever, just long enough to remember what your own inner voice sounds like without the constant echo of everyone else's. Long enough to observe your thoughts before they are hijacked by what's relevant. long enough to choose the fertile ground of boredom over the barren distraction of endless scrolling, and to discover that boredom often germinates something far better: depth. That is where the real work commences, when the external noise fades and all that remains is your own presence. At first, this inner landscape may feel unnervingly empty. That's natural. You've been filling every spare moment for years. Stillness is a foreign country, but it is in this unfamiliar, open space that something beautiful begins to stir. Your own native curiosity, your own unanswered questions, your own deep-seated desire to build, to shape, to write, to make, to reflect. Creativity returns, not because you forced it, but because you finally cleared the mental space where it could take root and grow. You transition from being a consumer to becoming a creator, from operating on reflex to living with intention, from following the herd to thinking for yourself. And no, this process isn't glamorous. No one sees the immense effort it takes to sit in silence instead of reflexively reaching for your phone. No one applauds you for reading a book instead of doom scrolling. There is no viral moment in the daily disciplined practice of self-mastery. But over time, the difference becomes undeniable. Your conversations gain depth. Your focus sharpens to a fine point. Your presence acquires a new grounded strength. You stop drifting passively through your days and begin anchoring yourself in each moment. Not because you've eliminated every possible distraction, but because you've chosen not to hand them your mind on demand. This doesn't mean you reject the world outright. It means you stop allowing it to dictate the content and cadence of your inner life. You become the discerning editor of your own consciousness. You learn what to cut, what to keep, and what to let pass by without a reaction. You recognize the critical difference between noise and knowledge, between being informed and being overloaded, between staying updated and staying perpetually disturbed. And once you internalize that difference, you begin to guard your attention as if it were sacred, because it is. Seneca warned that to be everywhere is to be nowhere. And that is the default state of most minds today. Everywhere, yet nowhere. Scattered across headlines, glued to reels, lost in updates that change nothing meaningful in their inner world. Strategic disappearance, therefore, isn't just about stepping away from people. It's about stepping back from the very systems that profit from your mental fatigue and fragmentation. It's about slowing your mind down enough to hear what whispers beneath the constant buzz, to confront what you've been avoiding, to notice what actually truly matters to you. You begin replacing mindless consumption with purposeful reflection. Instead of binging content, you write. Instead of arguing in digital spaces, you journal. Instead of reacting to the next transient controversy, you build something that reflects who you are becoming. Your time transforms from something you kill into something you consciously cultivate. And with that shift, you stop living on the surface of life. You begin to dive deep into ideas, into personal growth, into the unexplored territories of your own self. This is the silent transformation. No one may notice it at first, but over time, they will feel it. You won't respond as quickly to every provocation. You won't be as easy to reach on a whim. You won't feel compelled to offer an opinion on every passing trend. Not because you don't care, but because you care too deeply to waste your precious focus. You've transitioned from being a byproduct of the algorithmic feed to being the deliberate author of your one precious life. And that shift changes everything. This is what reclaiming your mind authentically means. Not running away from the world, but meeting it with a newfound, grounded presence. Choosing with care what enters your consciousness. Recognizing that not every external voice deserves a permanent seat at the table of your thoughts. And most importantly, realizing that your greatest power lies not in how much you know about the world, but in how clearly and calmly you can think your own thoughts. So, disappear, not from life itself, but from the noise that keeps you numb. Step back, not to escape, but to refine. And when you return with a mind that is not just awake, but profoundly aware. A mind that is not just full of information, but focused on wisdom. A consciousness that doesn't just react to stimuli, but consciously chooses its response. Because once your attention is truly, fully your own again, so is your life. Disappearing is only the initial phase. Stepping back from the world's clamor, its endless demands, its addictive noise. That's the comparatively simple part. What follows, however, is what genuinely forges you. The silence that initially felt peaceful and expansive begins to challenge you. The empty calendar slots, the unanswered messages, the slower, quieter mornings, they stop being mere symbols of liberation and start functioning as mirrors, reflecting back who you are when no one is watching. And this is where many people slip. They believe the act of pulling away is the transformation itself. But if you don't use that reclaimed space to rebuild with conscious purpose, the silence can become hollow. Disappearance without deliberate direction is just drifting. It isn't liberation, it's a form of stagnation. There is a profound internal discipline required in solitude that few discuss. Not the discipline of external routine, but the internal discipline of staying present with yourself long enough to honestly see who is there. The impulse will be strong to fill the newfound time, to replace the external chaos with internal busyness. But reconstruction isn't about staying occupied. It's about staying deliberate. It's about learning how to choose all over again, not to react out of habit, not to fall back into automatic patterns, but to build slowly, one conscious, aligned piece at a time. This is the juncture where you truly separate from the person you used to be, not through dramatic one-off gestures, but through consistent, private acts of realignment. When Carl Jung stepped back from his public life and retreated to Bullingen Tower, he wasn't escaping, he was creating. Stone by stone, journal entry by journal entry, quiet walk by quiet walk, he built an external environment that mirrored the internal psyche he was striving to understand. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't shared on any platform, it wasn't validated by external applause, and that is precisely what made it potent. Because growth that doesn't feel the need to be witnessed is growth that endures. The more you rebuild in silence, the stronger your foundation becomes. You are not sculpting an identity for others to admire. You are constructing a life you can quietly, deeply respect. And this work cannot be rushed. There is no shortcut to authentic becoming. You wake up and you choose again. You read not to impress anyone with your literary diet, but to genuinely understand and expand. You write not with the intent of being read, but to explore the contours of your own mind. You walk without headphones, allowing the natural world to recalibrate a nervous system that has been overstimulated for years. You create routines not to feel productive in the conventional sense, but to feel grounded, centered, and whole. These acts seem small, they are quiet, they are easy for the world to overlook, but they carry immense weight. They are acts of devotion to a future self you haven't fully met yet. You begin to sense it, a shift in your breath, a newfound firmness in your boundaries, a crystalline clarity in your intentions. And while the external world remains as loud as ever, you no longer require its volume to feel alive. The most sacred transformations are often the ones that happen in total silence. It's tempting to want to document the process, to prove you're changing, to share the books you're reading, the insights you're having, the breakthroughs you've encountered. But something within you starts to gently resist that urge, because you realize that the most sacred, formative things often lose their nascent power when exposed to the light too soon. Some processes are meant to incubate, to remain unspoken and unshared until they have matured into something solid and undeniable. There is a profound dignity in privacy, a deep wisdom in keeping your evolution to yourself until it no longer requires external defense. Plato wrote, "The first and greatest victory is to conquer yourself." And that victory is most often won in silence. There will be days when nothing feels different, when the silence feels pointless, when your thoughts seem to run in repetitive circles. But this too is part of the reconstruction. The mind is shedding old layers. The body is detoxing from a lifetime of urgency. The soul is learning how to move without an audience's applause. You are not failing, you are recalibrating. And if you can stay patient in this in-between space, this fertile, uncertain ground, something will eventually click into place. You no longer crave constant stimulation. You no longer check your phone out of reflexive boredom. You stop comparing your journey to others. You stop over-explaining your choices. You stop trying to prove your worth. You simply begin to live. And in that quiet, intentional living, something remarkable takes root. Integrity. Your life becomes a truer reflection of your values, not your fleeting impulses. You start making choices that make deep sense to you, even if they confuse or disappoint others. You're not rejecting people. You are simply refusing to abandon yourself ever again. That is the crucial distinction between disappearing to escape and disappearing to evolve. One runs from discomfort, the other walks directly into it and builds a fire there, a place to stay, a place to work, a place to grow without the crushing pressure of performance. This is the sacred ground of reconstruction, where nothing is wasted and everything begins anew with intention. You'll discover that your new routines aren't rigid cages. They are alive. They flex with your energy. They evolve alongside your growing clarity. You don't follow them to feel worthy. You follow them to remain in alignment. And in doing so, you begin to rebuild not just your habits, but your entire sense of self. A self that doesn't shift with the wind of others' opinions. A self that doesn't collapse under external pressure. A self that knows its direction, even if no one else can yet see the path. Marcus Aurelius once admonished himself, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." Reconstruction is the phase where you stop debating who you might become and start living as if you already are that person. Eventually, people may begin to notice. They might comment on your newfound calm, your grounded presence, your sharpened focus, but by then you won't need their recognition because you've already seen yourself clearly. You've already earned your own respect. And that generates a confidence that doesn't require noise to exist. It is steady, it is quiet, it is earned, and it is irrevocably yours. This is the essence of the discipline of reconstruction, the slow, intentional, often invisible act of returning to yourself, not to the person the world told you to be, not to the persona you constructed to impress, but to the real you, the one who doesn't frantically chase an identity, but patiently, privately, powerfully cultivates it, piece by peaceful piece. There is something quietly sacred about the act of writing down your thoughts when no one else will ever read them. In a culture that encourages you to speak before thinking, to post before processing, and to perform your progress for the sake of external validation, the private act of journaling feels almost radical. But this isn't about keeping a sterile record of your daily activities. It's not a recap or a to-do list. It is something far more profound, a journal that doesn't serve your memory, but serves your becoming, a space where your raw, half-formed questions, your honest observations, and your uncensored reflections can land without judgment. It doesn't demand that you be polished or profound. It only asks that you be real. This kind of journal isn't meant to narrate the story of your past. It is designed to reveal the patterns of your future. Each word you write is a single thread. At first, they may seem random, disconnected, but as the pages fill, something begins to take shape. You start to notice where your energy naturally expands and where it contracts. You see the recurring loops of your triggers. You trace the subtle, almost imperceptible ways you have outgrown what once defined you. You catch yourself in the very act of changing, not because someone validated the shift, but because your own written words begin to speak back to you with startling clarity. The journal becomes a mirror, not a mirror reflecting who you were, but a mirror revealing who you are in the process of becoming. The beauty of this practice is that it demands nothing but your own honesty. It doesn't reward performance. It doesn't require poetic structure. It only asks that you pay sincere attention to yourself, to the movements of your inner world, to the quiet currents of your thoughts. You write not to declare who you are, but to discover it. Carl Jung understood the monumental importance of this internal dialogue when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Journaling is that vital bridge. It gives your unconscious mind a respectful place to speak its truth. And in doing so, it gradually loosens the strangling grip of old, limiting narratives. At first, it might feel like nothing is happening. You sit down with the blank page and feel uncertain, even resistant. The page stares back, expectant and empty, but this initial discomfort is an integral part of the process. You are learning to face yourself without distraction, without filters, without the need to entertain or impress. And once you gently push through that initial stillness, something begins to flow. You'll write a single sentence and realize it emerged from a place deeper than your everyday surface mind. You'll read an entry from weeks past and feel a jolt of recognition at a clarity you didn't know you possessed at the time. The journal becomes a faithful witness. It holds all the moments you would have otherwise let slip away, the quiet insights, the invisible internal battles, the mental pivots that slowly, steadily reshape your inner landscape. Over time, you develop a relationship with your journal that mirrors your relationship with your own soul. You start asking yourself better, more penetrating questions. You stop editing your truth to make it palatable. You begin to trust your own unique process of unfolding. And because no one else will ever see these pages, there is an unparalleled freedom. No need to impress. No pressure to sound profound. Just open space to explore the profound depth of your own becoming. What you once feared would be chaotic becomes a form of internal order. What felt intangible and fleeting begins to take tangible form. And that simple act of giving form to your inner world changes everything. The power of journaling lies not in the physical act of writing, but in what the practice reveals to you. You'll begin to notice when you're unconsciously repeating old, unhelpful patterns. You'll catch yourself just before making a decision that no longer aligns with who you're becoming. You'll recognize the subtle shifts in your own language, the way your tone softens when you're healing, or sharpens with resolve when you're ready to draw a necessary boundary. These aren't loud, dramatic changes. They aren't the kind you would post about, but they are profoundly real, and they are yours alone. They build the essential internal scaffolding for a life that feels authentic, not just successful by external metrics. Writing in this way becomes a profound form of grounding. When the external world feels chaotic or your own thoughts start to spiral, the journal becomes a container. It doesn't magically solve your problems, but it gives them a shape. And once something has a shape, it can be moved. It can be examined from different angles. It can be shifted. You learn that emotions are not permanent facts. They are weather patterns passing through the sky of your awareness. You learn that long-held beliefs can be respectfully challenged. You discover that even your most stubborn assumptions can begin to dissolve under the gentle, persistent light of honest observation. You learn how to sit with discomfort without immediately trying to flee from it. And you learn how to celebrate small, private breakthroughs, not for external recognition, but for the resilience they build within you. As you continue, the journal begins to reflect something more significant than mere growth. It reflects devotion, the act of returning to the page again and again, even on the days you feel you have nothing to say, is a quiet declaration. I am committed to understanding myself, and that commitment, held in consistency, matters. It rewires your sense of identity from the inside out. You stop searching for clarity in the opinions of others. You start finding it in the quiet, honest lines of your own handwriting. Seneca noted, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Journaling makes this vividly clear. You begin to see how frequently your own mind generates unnecessary suffering, how many of your worries are rehearsed patterns, not imminent realities. How often you betray your own peace by trying to predict and control what hasn't even happened. And when you see it clearly on the page, you can begin to shift it. You can rewrite the internal script. You can name the fear, and in the simple, powerful act of naming it, you remove its teeth. There is something undeniably anchoring about tracking your own transformation. Not because it makes you feel superior, but because it serves as tangible evidence that growth is always, always possible. That no matter how many times you've temporarily fallen back into old ways, there is still a resilient part of you reaching forward, learning, evolving. The journal becomes the quiet proof that even in the silence, even when absolutely no one was watching, you were doing the work. You were changing. You were peeling back layers. You were building a mind that responds instead of reacts, a heart that listens instead of performs, a self that leads its own life rather than pleasing its way through one. This quiet, consistent practice of writing, when sustained, becomes a kind of internal compass. It reminds you where you began. It reveals with startling clarity how far you've traveled. And most importantly, it shows you that nothing about you is static or fixed. That even the parts that once felt immutably stuck were never permanent. They were simply waiting for your respectful attention. Waiting for your willingness to look at them clearly, without shame, without rush, without resistance. You don't need perfect prose. You don't need immediate answers. You only need your own presence. A few minutes each day, a small, sacred ritual of return. And slowly, page by page, word by word, something within you begins to solidify, not in rigidity but in truth. Not in ego, but in essence. And when that essence begins to rise steadily to the surface, it transforms how you move through the world. Not louder, not brighter, but more anchored, more sure, more profoundly whole. And that is the kind of transformation no one can ever take from you, because it was built word by word in the quiet dark, where all real and enduring things must first begin. There arrives a moment. It comes quietly, without ceremony or fanfare, when you realize it is time to return. Not because the world has summoned you back, not because anyone has asked, but because something within you has settled. Something that used to chase relentlessly no longer feels the need to run. Something that once trembled with uncertainty now stands in a deep, unshakable stillness. You aren't stepping back into the world to be seen. You are stepping forward because you no longer feel the need to hide. And what meets you isn't immediate recognition. It's often confusion. People look at you and they sense that something is different. You are familiar yet not the same. And that is not an accident. That is precisely the point. You didn't just disappear, you evolved. While others were busy keeping pace with the incessant noise, you chose to slow down. You paid close attention to the things most people rush to avoid. You felt everything you were once told to suppress. You questioned the assumptions most accept without thought. And in doing so, you quietly rewired the very way you exist. There is no grand announcement for this kind of return, no dramatic transformation montage. It happens so gradually, so organically, that by the time you fully emerge, you barely resemble the person who first walked away. You've shed external expectations like a skin you've outgrown. The roles that once defined you now feel like borrowed costumes from a play that's long since ended. The silence has shaped you. It carved out necessary space within your thoughts. It cleared away the accumulated emotional clutter. It stripped off the parts of you that existed solely to be liked or approved of. And now that you're back, the things that once made you feel seen often hold little interest. You aren't more distant or cold. You are simply no longer tethered to the exhausting machinery of performance. You still listen deeply. You still care authentically. But your sense of worth is no longer hinged on being universally understood. The desperate need for external approval has dissolved, and what remains in its place is a grounded, quiet presence. A presence that communicates more through its being than anything you could ever verbally explain. Some will misread it. They'll say, "You've changed," and they'll say it as if it's a loss, a problem to be solved. They'll try the same old jokes, tell the same familiar stories, expecting you to respond with the same old reactions. But your laughter doesn't come as easily now, not out of bitterness or pride, but because you've genuinely outgrown that particular rhythm. You're no longer dancing to a beat set by someone else. The humor that once masked discomfort now sounds hollow. The small talk that once filled awkward silences now feels like meaningless noise. And what once created a sense of bonding now reveals a subtle separation, not born of resentment but of simple, unvarnished truth. There is a necessary loneliness that accompanies authentic becoming, a stretch of the path where your transformation temporarily alienates you from the very people who once felt like home. But that loneliness is not emptiness. It is alignment. It is a sacred space being cleared, making room for new connections with people who will meet you where you are, not where you were. And in that fertile in-between space, you learn to stand unwaveringly in yourself. You stop over-explaining your shift. You stop apologizing for your healthy boundaries. You stop translating your contemplative silence into something more palatable for others. And in that steadfast stillness, your power deepens, roots down. Aristotle said that knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. But knowing yourself changes everything else too. It makes shallow praise feel meaningless. It makes external validation feel like a faint, distant echo. You no longer seek the spotlight. You carry a quiet, steady light within. You walk into rooms differently. You say less, but your words carry more meaning. You don't need to dominate conversations to feel heard. Your energy, your very being, speaks on your behalf. It's not louder. It's just unmistakably deeply rooted. And that can be unsettling to people who knew you only when you were still bending yourself to fit in. You've become a mirror, not in a way that flatters, but in a way that reveals. Your calm presence reflects back to others the parts of themselves they have yet to face, the growth they have yet to courageously undertake. And that can be uncomfortable. Some will pull away, some will project their own insecurities onto you, but others will lean in. They'll feel something in you that they've been silently longing for in themselves. A stillness, a sincerity, a freedom from pretense. And it won't be your words that move them. It will be your being. The quiet way you occupy space without shrinking. The way you can say no without flinching. The way your eyes no longer scan the room for approval. They rest, calm and unbothered, already full. What you've built inside can't be seen in a photograph, but it can be felt. The countless hours of reflection, the filled pages of your journal, the private moments of breakdown that became your most profound breakthroughs. Those don't translate into casual small talk, but they radiate from you. In your tone, in your timing, in your ability to remain centered when others would panic. That caliber of transformation doesn't feel the need to explain itself. It simply walks into a room and subtly shifts the atmosphere. People may not understand it, they don't have to, because this return wasn't for them, it was for you. This isn't the part where you revert to how things were. This is where you carry your cultivated inner world with you into the outer one, quietly, intentionally, without needing to prove or perform anything. You're not here to convince anyone that you've changed. You're here to live in a way that proves you no longer require their convincing. Carl Jung once stated, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." And that choice is no longer reactive. It is sovereign. It is steady. It doesn't beg to be seen. It consciously chooses when and where to be visible. Eventually, the acute need to disappear fades, not because the world has suddenly become easier or quieter, but because you have become more integrated, more whole. You no longer have to physically leave to find yourself. You carry yourself, whole and intact, with you wherever you go. The boundaries you once had to strenuously enforce now exist naturally within you. The clarity you once had to search for in solitude now flows through your daily actions. You've returned, not as the version everyone expected, but as the one you were always meant to become. No longer deluded, no longer distracted, just present, rooted, free. This is the quiet return, not a comeback, not a reinvention, a revelation. And the world may never fully understand the silence that shaped you, but you will carry its unshakable strength in everything you do. You didn't just return, you rose, clearer, quieter, unshakable. If you're ready to continue this journey of inner mastery, the next video on your screen will take you even deeper. Watch it next. Thank you for being here with Stoic Mindset Mastery. If this added value to your journey, please like the video. It genuinely helps this channel grow and reach others seeking this same depth. Until next time.